Hello, I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of History, and welcome to the latest edition of Tuesday Night History. Today we're going to do the Godzilla special, or the Gojira, depending on where you're from, because we're going to talk about the atomic bombings of Japan. Was it worth it? If you were President Harry S. Truman in August of 1945, would you drop the bombs? Well, that's what we're going to tackle. We are going to go through kind of what was going through his mind, as well as the military leaders that were trying to decide what was the best and quickest way to end the war with the least allied casualties, and that included the United States, Britain, France was involved, the Netherlands, China, and the Soviet Union. So that's what we're going to discuss. So, as usual, grab your favorite beverage. Always for me, it's a Hendrick's and tonic. And as usual, I want to dedicate the series to my good friend Marlene Davia, the Jersey Tomato, who's in a hospital in New Jersey. Get better, get off that ventilator, and hope you get back to your normal life. Okay, now, World War II. Now, we have just celebrated the 75th anniversary of VE Day, which is the victory in Europe. May 8th was the 75th anniversary when Germany surrendered to the Allies. There was still a war going on. World War II was not over. Japan was still in the game. And they were not an easy opponent. Trust me on this one. If anything, if I had to choose between which theater I'd fight in if I was in World War II, I would have fought in the European theater. I would not have wanted to fight in the Pacific theater or the China, Burma, India theater, which all encompass the entire war with Japan. So, okay, now, oh wow, this thing just died on me. Okay, now, you're Harry S. Truman, and Franklin Roosevelt had just perished on August of 1945. Hold on, I got to turn this thing back on. On April of 1945, I'm sorry, this thing just threw me off. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died in April of 1945, a month before Germany surrendered. Now, Harry S. Truman now becomes the president. So he is told that he has at his disposal atomic bombs. He found this out at the Potsdam Conference, which was in July. We had a guy named J. Robert Oppenheimer who was running the Manhattan Project, and they had labs in New Mexico, and what they were doing was trying to create a nuclear explosion. They had uranium and they had plutonium. Well, on July 16th of 1945, Harry Truman gets the message that they had a successful detonation in New Mexico. Winston Churchill is also involved, and they reluctantly, but had to tell Joseph Stalin, the premier of the Soviet Union, mostly because he already knew. He had a lot of spies in the Manhattan Project. So, okay, now, in the past year, we had lost, just America alone, had lost a lot of guys. I mean, a lot of guys fighting the war in the Pacific. If you look at Iwo Jima, we lost about 6,821 men killed, and then we had about 20,000 wounded. The Japanese, which estimates are between 21 to 23,000, almost all of them were dead. There were a few hundred who survived, most of them injured, and a few didn't quit the war until many years later. Okinawa. Iwo Jima was in February 19th of 1945. Now then go to April, and we landed in Okinawa. We lost 12,000 men killed. That includes the Navy and the Army. The Navy lost 5,000 men killed, another, say, 5,000 injured. That was about a 60-mile long island. Iwo Jima was 8 square miles. Those two little tiny islands, 12,000 killed and 6,800 killed, just on those two little islands. So you can imagine, and right before that, the fall of 1944, September through November, we landed in an island called Peleliu, which is near the Philippines. We had about 6,000 casualties. The Japanese, very few would surrender. They had about 10, 11,000 in Peleliu. Iwo Jima, they had about 21 to 23,000. And in Okinawa, between the Japanese and the Okinawans, you're talking about 120,000 to 150,000 killed. That's just in Okinawa. Okay, so imagine you're landing in Japan. That's the prospect of an Allied invasion of Japan. This was on Harry Truman's mind. There were estimates that there would be about 1 million casualties. Now, World War II had been going on since 1939. For the Chinese, it had been going on since 1937. They were tired of war. Everybody was tired of war. So, Manhattan Project. You're being told that you've got these bombs that you could use. Okay, very good. Well, I just want to show you a couple things here real quick. Okay, so this is the island of Japan. Here is Okinawa. Now, when we invaded Okinawa, one of the biggest problems that we had were kamikaze attacks. The Japanese can be your best friend or they can be your worst enemy. And in this case, they were our worst enemy. They were fanatical. They were ready to kill themselves. The entire island was about to wage total war. Every able-bodied adult, men and women, were going to fight. Now, it was estimated that, well, children and old people, the Japanese authorities didn't want them to fight, but they realized that they're going to be trapped and they're going to be in a lot of the fighting. So they might as well be used too, if they can be used. So that's something that needs to be considered. Am I in focus, by the way? Okay, all right. So we're talking tens of millions of people living in Japan, and that's how many people you're going to have to fight just about everybody, except for like maybe the infants. So this was the prospect of what the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands. The Soviet Union was not in the war yet, and we will get to that. Okay, so now we will go to the next slide. And here's China, here's Japan, and here's Okinawa. Now, any invasion of Okinawa, you're going to have Japanese attacks coming from, this is Taiwan, where the Republic of China is. This is where the People's Republic of China is. So you'd have attacks from China, you'd have attacks from Japan. I don't know if they could make it from Korea, but when you land in Japan, you would have forces from Korea attacking. And plus the logistics of an invasion of Japan. Now the Japanese don't have to travel far. They know their own territory. The roads are there, the supplies are there, so you can't cut them off. We did wage a war with Japan and unrestricted submarine warfare. And we were at a point where we started bombing Japan. Now, before the U.S. entry, Germany and Japan were known for bombing civilian areas. They did it to Rotterdam. Even in the Spanish Civil War, they did it to a city called Guernica, the Germans and the Italians. But Rotterdam, Coventry, London, many parts of England were leveled. Warsaw was leveled. Soviet cities were leveled by the Germans. The Japanese, they leveled a lot of Chinese cities, Nanking. So when we started bombing them, we had a guy by the name of Curtis Lemay. Curtis Lemay, his theory was, they have it coming. They've been doing it to everybody else. It's about time they got it. His job was to level Japanese cities and destroy the industries so that they can't continue the fight. He's not involved in the island hopping campaign. So Curtis Lemay, from Guam, Tinian, and Saipan, they launched B-29s. And I'll show you a picture of a B-29 here. Now, whenever they're doing high-level attacks at 30,000 feet, because the B-29 was a pressurized plane, whenever they're dropping high-level bombs, high explosives, they weren't really doing that well of a job. So what they decided to do was they were going to go low-level, like around 5,000 feet, and drop incendiaries, napalm. When they did that on March the 9th of 1945, 100,000, estimates of between 80 to 100,000 civilians in military were killed in Tokyo. It was so hot that the rivers were boiling. They found bodies for days, charred bodies for days. That was Tokyo. These were the new incendiary attacks that we were inflicting upon Japan. So after the Tokyo success, Curtis LeMay said, hey, let's keep doing it to all the Japanese cities. So if you want to say, well, it wasn't right to kill all the civilians with the nukes, you have to consider that with the incendiary bombing campaign, we were already wiping out cities and killing tens of thousands of civilians. So, okay, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a kamikaze. They expected that there were going to be a lot of kamikaze attacks. These kamikaze attacks, this is where the Japanese, they would fly the plane right into a ship. They were killing thousands of our servicemen in the Navy. Our servicemen were on high alert for such a long time that many of them were going mad. So back then we called it battle fatigue, now it's called PTSD. That was a major factor that Harry Truman had to consider, was the fact that people were going mad, PTSD. If you fought in the Pacific, you didn't go home. You didn't serve 18 months and go home. You kept fighting and kept fighting. You went from one island to another to another. When they told you to go to an island, you went to an island. You did not go home. Maybe you went for like a break, but you were not, they didn't say to you, okay, done, thank you for your service. It wasn't anything like that. All right, let's see. Here's an example. This is the Bunker Hill, one of our aircraft carriers that got hit in the Battle of Okinawa. Fortunately, it didn't sink. Okay, so this kind of will give you a map. Here's Japan. All these areas would be able to use kamikaze attacks on our guys. Anywhere from Japan, anywhere from Korea, China, they would have been able to attack our guys. And then again, remember, just about everybody, every single person in the country would have been used as a weapon against our forces. 1 million casualties is what they were expecting. So, let's see, go on to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So with all this on his mind, Harry Truman knew, okay, how am I going to be judged? I may be judged by starting a new type of warfare, a nuclear warfare, or I can be, and that'll be sometime in the future. Or I can be judged now by the American people who are going to say, you had these weapons which could have ended the war with minimal Allied casualties, and you didn't use them? He would have been, just imagine if you were in his shoes. At this point, you have to admit, it was kind of a no-brainer. 1 million casualties and maybe 100 million Japanese, I'm throwing this number out, versus maybe 200,000 casualties for Japan and 0. They said there was 1 casualty for one of the guys, but he had mental illness to begin with. And there were American servicemen that were prisoners of war in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Unfortunately, they were killed. Anyway, okay, so this is the Enola Gay. I actually met the guy the bombardier who pressed the button to release the bomb. His name was Tom Farabee. And I asked him, do you have any regrets for nuking Hiroshima? He said, absolutely not. He said, we saved 1 million American lives. We saved lives of our friends. And he did mention some of our allies, like the British. He said, and the Australians. He said, we saved all those guys. And we didn't lose any guys in the process. So Tom Farabee had no regret. Dutch Van Kirk, another gentleman I met who was he was like the engineer, same thing. Any regrets? He said none whatsoever. Okay, that is a uranium bomb. It was called the Little Boy. That was the one that was dropped on Hiroshima. About 100,000 estimated killed in Hiroshima. And that was on August 6, 1945. And that is the actual explosion. I actually met the guy who took that picture. He was in, I think it was the Great Artiste or one of the other planes, but I don't recall his name. Okay, now, that was August 6. Japan didn't surrender. August 9 comes around. Now, the Soviets decide on August the 9th to declare war. And they invaded Manchuria. And They went into Manchuria and they went into northern Korea. They stopped at the 38th parallel because there was an agreement between the U.S. and the Soviets that they would stop at the 38th parallel, which is how we have North and South Korea today. Anyway, okay, so this is the boxcar. This was the B-29 that dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. That was on August the 9th. And they used a plutonium bomb called the Fat Man. Estimates of about 30 to 50,000 killed, more closer to 30,000, and that is the actual explosion of, let's just say 35,000. There's no way of knowing for sure. So that was on August the 9th. Now, for days there were debates. Some of the radicals didn't want Japan to surrender. There were some negotiations going on that we heard about where Japan was considering surrender, and this is where some of the controversy is. But the thing is that they wanted all these conditions. We said unconditional surrender. Now, we did give them one, in the negotiation, we did give them one out. We did agree that we will let Emperor Hirohito stay in power because they knew that if they did take over Japan, there's still going to be a lot of guys that are going to want to fight, even if they surrendered. So with Hirohito still being the emperor and he didn't lose his power and he retained his power, Emperor Hirohito was able to tell his people, stand down, which is what he did. Imagine if we had invaded Iraq and Saddam Hussein stayed in power and he told all his people, stand down. Maybe we wouldn't have had all the fighting in Iraq. Who knows? That's speculation. But with Japan, they said, we want Hirohito to stay in power or no good. We agreed on that one condition, and Japan finally surrendered. August the 15th, Emperor Hirohito got on the radio and announced the war is over. First time that the Japanese that ever heard Emperor Hirohito's voice, because he was like a god to them. So we celebrated. We didn't lose a million guys. Our friends, the Aussies, the Brits, the Dutch, none of them, the Chinese. We got them all. On September the 2nd, we got the Japanese to surrender on the USS Missouri. The announcement was August the 15th. That's when hostilities ceased. September the 2nd on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the formal surrender. We cheered. We finally had peace. World War II was finally over. Moral of the story, make love, not war. Anyway, all right, well, that was my presentation. I hope you can kind of understand what was in Harry Truman's mind. Try not to judge him by today's standards. He wanted to end the war. Everyone was tired of war. The whole world was tired of war. We had somewhere between 50 to 70 million people dead. And if we had invaded Japan, there would have been, just on the Allied side alone, about 1 million people dead. No telling how many of the Japanese. So for me, I'm of the opinion that it was the right thing to do. You can judge for yourself. But anyway, these people are happy. The war is over. Anyway, further reading. This is a good book. Eagle Against the Sun by Ronald Spector. It's considered one of the best, if not the best, one-volume books on the Pacific War. Now, if you're more into the China, Burma, India theater, which is what our British friends prefer, Field Marshal Slim, Viscount Slim, Defeat into Victory. This is the Folio Society edition. Talks a lot about the China, Burma, India theater. Now, for those of you who listen to our podcast, we are going to have a special guest next Monday. If you want to listen to our podcast, Alex Kershaw is going to be our guest. He wrote many of these books. The Bedford Boys, The Longest Winter, great book. The Few, this is about the Eagle Squadron, Battle of Britain. And this is, now The Liberator is a Netflix series, I believe, and The First Wave, which is one of his latest books. In fact, it is his latest book. Great book. It's about the first wave on D-Day. So Alex Kershaw will be our guest next Monday on our podcast. So we hope that you listen. Anyway, okay, so this is the Tuesday Night History. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Central, 10 Eastern. I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of Houston and Sons of History. I'm sorry. I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of History. Thank you very much and have yourself a great evening. Thank you.